Welcome everyone online who has grabbed a coffee or a tea and joined our session today, brought to you by INN8, and we are the advisor's partner. Joining me today is Georgina Smith. George, quite a poignant tagline given the subject we're going to be working through today, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Anything with intimacy and gets people going, huh?
I'm Michael Summerton. I'm going to be your interrogator in chief today. But before we get into the details, this has been a busy week for most of us, George, especially you. There's with the World Cup going on, how's anyone getting any work done? And I believe there's another session on tomorrow, is there not?
Yeah, in between making sure my Super Brew is up to date on all the groups that I'm on, and making sure that I'm in the top 3 at least of all those groups, which I am at the moment. And yeah, just put that out there. Yeah, and of course, but more importantly, I think what you're referring to is the fact that we've got a really great webinar tomorrow with Wayne Barnes, international referee, good friend of INN8, and yeah, he's very kindly interrupted his busy World Cup schedule to come and chat to us about how it is to make decisions under pressure. What do you need to do to be at the top for 16 years? So in his 5th World Cup at the moment, I think he can share some pretty decent insights with us.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. And ad break over. I'm really looking forward to that session too. With introductions over, shall we dive right into this exciting topic?
Why not? I think that's a really great way to start. And I think maybe we should probably address the elephant in the room, where we talk about sales. You know, a lot of people think sales is a dirty word, Mike, you know, and it's not. I make no apologies for the fact that I'm in sales. I've been in sales all my life. I thoroughly enjoy sales, and I think all of us are in sales every day, right? We're influencing people every day, whether we're influencing a group or on a one-to-one session or trying to get something over the line. Yeah, I mean, sales is not just a case of a transaction. Sales can be transferring an idea from one person to another. So I would really, you know, love to get us away from the fact that sales is a dirty word. It's absolutely not.
Absolutely. I love that concept of transferring conviction, George, that you mentioned. And it's very relevant in sort of my proposition space as well, as we try to convince people to do things with us. So, George, I'm certain that the audience has read all your articles, and perhaps there's a book in the pipeline, and maybe INN8 should buy the rights to the movie at some point. But for those of us who are new to the concept of the intimacy curve, could you just briefly explain to us, you know, what you mean when you talk about the intimacy curve, and how might it benefit those in sort of sales or relationship building roles?
Yeah, I think the intimacy curve is well, I mean, let's go back to the beginning. The intimacy curve is it's a framework that I use to be able to talk coherently with a team about where people are in their relationships. And it can work just as well in business as it can in personal relationships as well. And in fact, that the personal side, I think, is the easiest place to land what the intimacy curve is. I think, Mike, and our audience, if you can think back to a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend, you know, not your spouse, maybe the one before that, you know, because that probably had a few bumps in the road. And I think it's really interesting to be able to think about what happened when you met that person, how you felt when you met that person, and actually the journey that you went on to the place where you felt intimate with that person. And, you know, when you think about the intimacy curve, and I'll share a slide in a minute, but before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about how it actually works. You know, over time, you've got time along the x-axis and you've got intimacy along the y-axis, and really over time there are certain events that take place that move you up the intimacy curve, and it's actually just really important to understand, you know, where you are in that intimacy curve.
Absolutely. I think the analogy of romantic relationships explains the intimacy curve really well, George. And perhaps just taking that sort of high level concept and sort of breaking down into the main concepts underpinning this intimacy curve. Maybe just touch on a couple of the sort of core tenets of your observations.
Yeah, exactly. So look, let me share the screen, and let me kind of explain in a bit more detail where I think we're going with this. So hopefully you can see my screen here. And what you've got here is yeah, great. What you've got here is you've got the intimacy on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. And what tends to happen is as you move through a relationship, and let's think about a personal relationship, you tend to pass certain milestones. And whenever I share this with any kind of team I'm in, and I shared it with my sales team, this whole concept with my sales team back just over a year ago. And it was quite interesting because those who were single in the room were like, "Ooh, okay, I kind of understand what's going on." But it's so important from a business relationship as well. So, but let's look at it from a personal relationship. So what you've got here is effectively, Mike, what you've got is you've got time, and then you've got intimacy. And essentially, what's actually happening here is you're just getting to know each other, right? You're just getting to know each other at the bottom of the curve. You've kind of got transactional relationships. That's the, hey, how was your day? What are you doing? What are you having for dinner? You know, that sort of transactional kind of stuff. You know, they're just getting to know you stuff, right? That's when you're kind of, you know, you're just finding out a little bit about each other. Do I like you? You know, you haven't quite got to the good night and good morning texts that come through, but you kind of got to that place where you know, you're a little bit interested in what that person's doing in their day, right? And then as you kind of move further up the curve, you get to that kind of deep connections. Now, what's interesting is those relationships that perhaps don't really flourish, they tend to stay in that transactional relationship area at the bottom. And what often happens is a relationship can actually be it can work very well in that area for a certain amount of time, right, Mike? You know, you can actually function pretty well when you're working at the bottom of the curve. The problem is there's no connection. You really need to get to connection, and the deep connection happens when you start discussing values, you start discussing a future, you start discussing actually whether you're actually aligned in the same beliefs. And that's where you get the deep connection. That's when you're moving up the intimacy curve, right? And you may well, in a personal relationship, you've got the I like you at the bottom. You kind of, you know, I want to introduce you to my family. That's kind of the middle piece. And then, of course, at the deep connection, you may well end up getting married, right? So you know, that is pretty much how the intimacy curves work from a personal relationship. And why is it important to know where you are in the intimacy curve? Well, for me, you know, if you hang around at the bottom, it's absolutely fine. But what happens when something goes wrong? You know, that's the problem. Because the further up the intimacy curve you are, the better you can weather storms that come along. So that storm might be someone else who's showing interest in your partner. That might be, you know, a difference in opinion, a difference in values, you know, but actually, if you've made the effort to move further up the intimacy curve, you can actually weather moving down the intimacy curve and then going back up it. Because this is a really dynamic relationship. You go up and down and up and down and up and down that curve when you're in that relationship.
Yeah. So let's just pause on the deep connections part of the graph, George, if you don't mind, because I'm just thinking of, you know, the sort of romantic relationship analogies, very relatable. Something which just came to mind while you were talking was an employer-employee relationship, which starts off very transactional. You know, here's my time for some work, and I give you a salary. Like it's you know, very transactional. But over time, you can move employees to be very passionate about what they do and their purpose in the world, and contributing to the success of your business. And similarly so for other business relationships. And so, but I guess, like, what are the benefits from moving somebody to that deep connection space? You know, I'm thinking things like trust and openness and transparency.
Absolutely, Mike. You know, and that's a great point to bring in about the employer-employee relationship. And that again is about, you know, getting to deep connection is, do we belong together? Do I feel like I belong with you? And you know, whenever I speak about this kind of thing and culture and culture in an organization, you know, we talk about belonging, but the opposite of belonging is not belonging, is not belonging rather. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. And that's when you're trying to be something fake. That's when you're trying to just show up as someone and you're just trying to fit in. And that never feels particularly good. So that deep connection is people see me for who I am and I belong where I want to be. And I belong with you, whether it's in a personal relationship, it's in a work relationship, or it's in a customer client relationship as well. It's that sense of belonging you get when you have a deep connection with someone. And that's really what you're aiming for. So in that employee-employer relationship, it's all the different things you can do to move an employee up the intimacy curve. And that might be as simple as, you know, team building stuff and getting together and stuff, but it also will be as simple and as straightforward as, you know, listening to people, being transparent and with everyone about what's going on in the organization, trusting each other, having each other's backs, and also, you know, just taking time to value employees and team members for the contribution they bring. And what you see in teams that are not functioning very well is they hang around at the bottom of that curve in that transactional relationship. Here's a piece of work, here's a task, please can you do it? Great, thanks very much. Even if they've done a great job, you know, you say thanks very much, but you really now we move on to the next task, and we're still in that transactional place. You know, to move yourself up to the deep connection, you've really got to work at trying to understand what's going to make that employee tick, and then what's going to make them feel like they belong in your organization. And that's not easy, and it takes a lot of work. But it's a whole variety of things that are going to make you feel like you've got a deep connection.
Yeah. So you touched on something there, George, in that it's hopefully beneficial to the relationship to understand where you are on the spectrum you know, in terms of connection and intimacy. But actually, there's a very relatable benefit for me, the person who's building the relationship, in that the more trust and more intimacy I develop, the more authentically I can show up in my interactions. And we've all had that experience of having to come to work and try and be somebody we're not. Whereas if you trust your staff, if you trust your relationships, you can show up so at home, maybe I sing Bon Jovi Always out loud in the kitchen. And I do that because my spouse and I have this trusting relationship that she's not going to film me and put it on Facebook. So I guess there's a benefit for you, the one building the relationship at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is it Living on a Prayer, Michael? Which one are you singing?
It's definitely always.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a benefit for both. Benefit for the company at large. There's a benefit for the manager and the leader of that team, and there's also a benefit for the team member. And of course, the real sort of measurable output you get from this is actually you know, what's your turnover of staff? Like how quickly are they turning over? Are they leaving? You know, because people who don't feel like they belong, they tend to leave because they want to find somewhere else where they belong, just as you would in a personal relationship. If you're hanging around in that transactional place, it doesn't take much for someone else to come along and say, hey, why don't you come and join me? I'm far more exciting.
Yeah. And so for your prospective clients and your existing clients, there's a longevity of relationship and an extension of that sort of time period that you're going to do business for when you invest in the quality of relationship like you're proposing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, what's really important here is to understand, you know, what it takes to move people up and down the intimacy curve. And when you're in a business relationship and you're in a place where, you know, you want to take a client from a prospect to a sale, it's like, well, what are the different ways in which I can actually move this person up the intimacy curve? And I think the first thing, of course, you want to work out is, do I want to move this person up the intimacy curve, right? Because that's also really important. And I think it's a very and often we do this and we run into these relationships and we try and further every single relationship. We move them all up the curve and we're just running around and getting ourselves in quite a tiz. Whereas actually, you know, using the intimacy curve, and the intimacy curve is a framework of conversation, and a framework of conversation within the team, you can actually have really fulfilling conversations about your sales funnel, or whatever it is that you're actually looking to influence. It could be, your team or whatever. And you could actually even look at your team and say, well, where are each of my team members on the intimacy curve? You can look at your client base and you can say, well, let me take all of my clients that are in my funnel, my sales funnel at the moment, and I'm going to plot them on the intimacy curve and actually see where each of them are. And then I'm going to have a really conscious decision and discussion with my team about which ones we want to take up the intimacy curve to a deeper connection, and how are we going to do that.
So that's a really useful filter, George. And as we move into some practical applications now, I just want to remind the audience, if you do have any questions, please drop them in. I see a couple coming through, and we will certainly address as many as we can towards the end at about 10:15. 10. So George, you were mentioning sort of practical application. The first sort of really useful application of the intimacy curve is using it as a filter to identify those relationships that most fit with what you're trying to achieve. Do you maybe just want to give us a couple examples of that?
Yeah, I absolutely. Now, I mentioned just now about understanding and taking time to work out, when a lead comes in, do I actually want to pursue this lead and take it up the intimacy curve? And I spend a lot of time with advisors and financial advisors and actually other entrepreneurs. And it's very easy to get stuck in this rabbit hole of a lead comes in, it's business, I need to do it, and I need to get the money in. The problem with that is you end up with perhaps a book of clients who are mismatched to your values. And some of them will become very difficult to move up the intimacy curve because they're just not aligned to what you actually want to do. And I always say this, I've had my own businesses before, if you don't turn away a client, you have not got a client value proposition. So if you've never turned one away, you haven't really sat down and thought to yourself, what is the type of client I want? Now, once you've done that, then you can make a very easy and early decision. Do I really want to take this client up the intimacy curve? So that's the first kind of filter. Actually, do I want to take this client? Are they matched to me? And as you know, Mike, my background was dentistry, and dentistry is so similar to financial services. I know it feels like it's probably a million miles away, but weirdly enough, we used to deal with clients who are in a high state of anxiety, often with an event that had just happened. We used to deal with a lot of compliance. I used to worry about where my new clients were coming from, where my new leads were coming from, whether my staff would turn up, and whether we'd be able to get the business through the door. So it's actually really similar kind of makeup to what our financial advisors look at. And really, we used to spend a lot of time at a certain point in the year when it was quiet to actually cull patients. Like the patients that we don't want, just cull them. We're just not the right dental practice for you. We think you'd be better off somewhere else. And that's feels like
so metaphorically cull, not sort of go around to their house and shoot them.
With my scythe, no.
Okay.
No, you cull them from the book.
And how did that work? I mean, telling a client that you no longer want to serve them is quite a difficult conversation.
Well, I mean, it tends to come up quite naturally, and usually it comes up when they're perhaps not particularly happy. And and what you tend to do is when a client isn't particularly happy or something's happened, you try and fix it very quickly, and then you get into this moving down the intimacy curve. Now you're rapidly plummeting down the intimacy curve, and you think, well, what am I going to do? Goodness me, like, how am I actually going to recover this relationship? Now, some of them you'll want to recover because you've gone so far up the intimacy curve with them, you actually want to recover those relationships. But some of them will just have not progressed up the intimacy curve enough, and you know that it's just going to be painful for both of you. And at that point, it's a case of, do you know what? We're probably not the best suited for each other, are we? I can recommend so-and-so who I think would be a perfect match for who you are. It also might be, a difference in values as well. We used to have quite a few patients who perhaps, wanted a different type of treatment, perhaps a more kind of homeopathic type way of being treated. That's not what we're there for. That's not how we deliver it. Other dentists do, and that's great, but we're not right for you. And I think that's a we're not the best people to be able to serve you in the way we think you want to be served. Is actually quite an adult conversation, I think, to be able to have. Difficult, but adult, and will make your life a lot easier.
Yeah. Okay, so we have exactly the group of clients who we want to pursue and woo and bring into our services. Maybe just let's talk through some practical ways that you go about approaching those relationships and attempting to move them up the intimacy curve.
Yeah, I mean, and when you're in business, obviously, moving away from that romantic relationship, when you're in business, you can actually pull on a team, and sales is a team sport, right? Financial service, being a financial advisor is a team sport. It's not all on one person. So now it's about, okay, let's look around the team. Let's look at the sort of person we want to move up the intimacy curve. Right, how are we going to do it? What are the things we're going to do? It might be that you've got someone in the team who you think would resonate very well with that client. And, just for that person to phone up and say, hey, let's meet for coffee. So-and-so's told me a little bit about what you're about and what you're trying to achieve. I'd love to get to know you a bit better. That's a typical event that might happen when you're trying to move someone up the intimacy curve. It's not all about just getting the CEO involved, the head of distribution involved, all of that kind of stuff. Yes, that's another thing you can do, but there are all sorts of things and levers you can pull to try and move that person up the intimacy curve. And it feels quite contrived, actually. But we're in the business of selling, and we know we want to get a deeper connection with this person. There's nothing wrong in saying you want to get a deeper connection with this person, and you value this person. Therefore, you want to put the right people in front of them, have the right conversations which take you to that deep connection level that we spoke about. And, some relationships will be like a slow burn, and some will be, think of romantic relationships again, those relationships where, particularly if you've come out of a long-term relationship yourself and, you want to just take it easy and slow. Some will be like a slow burn and they'll take a little while to get up that intimacy curve. Some they'll just sweep you off your feet. And my goodness, we are right up there at deep connection in 10 days. Like, how did that happen? Nothing wrong with either of those, but realize where you are in each of those relationships. I can think of advisors who we've been in front of very early on and said, I love it. I love what you're doing. Like, what do I do next? Like, how do I get involved? How do I come onto the platform? And actually, I get a little bit anxious at that point because I really want to make sure that they understand, how our platform is going to benefit their business. And quite often I'll go round the loop again to make sure that they understand exactly how our platform is going to benefit their business. Because sometimes people can get a little bit swept away by the hype that's coming around you, especially if you've been recommended by a friend or something like that.
Yeah. So George, I'm just going to play that back to you quickly and let me know if it makes sense. So actually the first stage is knowing your client really well. So understanding what makes them tick. And that's, you can, whether it's reading up about them or telephonic interviews, etc. And then you reflect internally on, well, what is my team made up of that is best going to benefit this client or this advisor over time. And I think, to use a random example, when I first started out many years ago, I was in the audit profession, and one of our partners I used to work for, you'd go to him for a review, and he hadn't been at the job the whole time. He'd had this client for 6-7 years, but he hadn't been at the job at all. And he used to look at the financial statements, and he knew exactly where the errors were. And he'd say, go look at accounts payable, your balance sheet's off, cash flow's wrong, go do it again. And you used to go back to my desk going, how did he know this? And he knew this because he knew the client so well. And in the client had actually surfaced up all of these issues, and he knew they were going to come through in the accounts anyway. And so I guess that's an illustration of how your deep knowledge of a client or prospect can really help you deliver a great service to them.
You're absolutely spot on there. And you see, already your partner was highlighting the red flags. They knew exactly where the red flags were. And, when you think about any relationship you've been in as well, you get these little like intuitive kind of like, and where are the red flags here? And some of them are not that big of red flags and you're quite happy to just like keep moving on. But some of them are very big red flags and you think, reverse out of this and move on. So even in your journey up the intimacy curve, you may uncover things that you don't like, which cause you to move straight back down the intimacy curve and go somewhere else. And that's perfectly fine. The key is knowing you're moving up the intimacy curve, so you're flushing this kind of stuff out, which I think is so important. Now, Mike, oh, go on. No, go on.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I think you're launching into it, but I just want to take our audience along with us. So, so we've identified a subset of clients who we really want to build these relationships with. We've done all this work to understand them, match our team, proactively sort of moving this relationship forward. And now, you need to make a choice. Like, when do I go in for the pitch? I want to make the sale. I want to close the deal. I want to start making this relationship sort of pay for my business. And so how do you decide? I mean, you talk about pushing for the no in your work. Maybe just expand a bit about on that and what you mean.
Yeah, before I go on to pushing for the no, I think what I'd love to do is, I think we need to understand what kind of sale we're in, right? So
yes. Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself.
So it's all in the book. Don't worry, Mike. It's all in the book.
Great.
So we think about the intimacy curve, and we're moving up. We actually haven't made a sale yet. All we're doing is getting to know you, getting to understand you. We've had a few initial contacts. We've been on a few dates. We've weathered perhaps a few bumps along the road. If you think in the dating game, maybe you've been late to a couple of dates, but you're far enough up the intimacy curve to be able to weather the storm of moving down the intimacy curve a little bit by being late for a date or something along those lines. But now, we laugh, you and I always have a joke, never lift your skirt on a first date, right? And so this is the, I'm not going to get crude along those lines, but this is the point of time where you actually make the sale. Like, this is, are we really matched to go for the sale? Now, the key thing here is to understand whether you're in one of two types of sales. Okay, there's a pain sale and there's a pleasure sale. They are the only two types of sale that you've got, right? And I think if I can just share my screen again, if you don't mind, Mike, I'm just going to share my screen here. So we're going to talk pain versus pleasure here. Can you see it, Mike? All right.
Yes, it's coming through. Thanks.
Perfect. So intimacy curve still in existence. Now, during your exploration, you're finding out whether you belong to each other. You will have found out what is causing the change in behavior. So whenever you go through a sale or you're influencing someone, it's a change in behavior you're looking to instill. So two types, pain or pleasure. And that determines how far up the intimacy curve you go. So, for example, if you're looking at a pain sale, you actually don't have to go up the intimacy curve very, very far. And I'll tell you why. Because that person is on a burning platform. Where they are at the moment is really not a very nice place. In fact, it's quite likely they'll jump very quickly, maybe even into the wrong relationship, just to get out of the relationship they're in at the moment. So that, if you're going to make a sale with a pain buyer, that's a quick sale. You don't have to go very far up the intimacy curve. Most sales, however, tend to be pleasure sales. So it's someone seeking pleasure, someone who's actually just looking around and thinking, what's actually out there? Let me just put the feelers out. So if I can just sort of, give you an example. If you think about two families going to look for a house, going to look around a house, they're both very similar. Both sets of parents are in their 30s, should we say, both with young kids. The house is near a new school, a really good school. It ticks all the boxes really for both families. But the question to ask, and the question the real estate agent should be asking is, why are you moving? And family number one may say, oh, we're moving because we've been burgled 3 times in the last 12 months. We really want to get out of where we are. And we're just keen to get to a new, nicer area. And family number two may say, listen, I've just inherited a lump sum. We're actually just looking to upscale our house and move into something a lot bigger. You're going to make an easier sale with family number one than you are with family number two, because they're in a pain situation and looking to leave where they are at the moment. So that's the understanding of what sort of sale you're in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, George. I mean, in a practical financial advisor world, this is the family who've had a death in the family. They're trying to wind up an estate. There's all this chaos happening, and they just need somebody to help them and do a decent job. So that seems like you don't have to have taken somebody all the way up to the pleasure curve. You can alleviate their pain quite quickly without having to build too much intimacy.
And now you've just touched on something really interesting there. So of course, when you've got a pain sale, you're staying at the bottom of the intimacy curve, the transactional part of the intimacy curve. So you've just got to get some stuff done. You just got to get tasks done, right? But it's what you do after you've got those tasks done that's really important. You know, if you want to keep this client as a long-term client, what are you going to do to move them up the intimacy curve? Because if you stay at the bottom of the intimacy curve, it's quite likely that a competitor can quite easily come along and eat your lunch. You know, everything you do has been very, you know, it's been done well, done to the usual SLAs. You've communicated as you should have done, but you know, there's no deep connection when you're at the pain sales stage. So you really do have to make sure that you still move that client up to this place of the pleasure sale or the deep connection part if you're going to hold on to them for the long term. Otherwise, all it's going to take is something to go wrong, and you haven't moved far enough up the intimacy curve to get yourself some, as Seth Godin calls it, benefit of the doubt. And then you can kind of move down the intimacy curve, or someone else is going to come along and be able to swipe them away and say, hey, why don't you come and join me? I think I've got values that actually match yours much closer.
Yeah. Okay, so understanding your prospective clients' drive and motive for making this decision is really helpful. And once you know this, you can actually go ahead and do your pitch, right? I mean,
yeah,
sorry,
absolutely.
I'm anxious. I want to go and do my pitch now. You know, that's
you see,
can we do that
this,
yet?
so this is brilliant, because this is the typical salesperson's approach. You know, they do tend to go too soon. And you know, and I'm always telling my guys, my team, like, just hold back. You're not ready yet. Don't go too soon. And what I always say is, you're ready to make the sale when your client can articulate back to you the benefits that you are going to bring to their business. Once you've got that, then you know that they're on the journey to being on your intimacy curve and going quite a long way up that. If they can't articulate the business, the benefits that you are going to bring to their business, then you are not far enough up the intimacy curve to make the sale, unless you're in the paying sale position. Okay. But let's imagine, and at that point, you need to go back round and emphasize exactly the sort of the benefits that you are going to bring to their business, and you know, start again, if you like, so that they get to the place where they can articulate it back to you. But let's imagine they can do that. Let's imagine they've actually got to that place, right? And you go and make the sale, and there are kind of three outcomes you get, Mike, right? The first one is yes, I love what you're doing. I love your product. Show me how to take it further, right? That's kind of like your number one outcome. The second best outcome is no. And I say no for lots of different reasons. So no, because, well, as a salesperson, I now know that I can actually either leave you as a potential prospect, and I can go and spend my time elsewhere, because actually, as a salesperson, the most valuable thing you have is time. So I can now actually think, well, okay, I can go and spend my time on other potential prospects, or I can actually explore why the no is there. So, you know, what is it about the proposition that I'm putting in front of you that you're not comfortable about? And actually, you know, explore the no and see whether you can change it into a yes. And I'll come back and explain why that's a really powerful yes in a minute. The worst outcome by a country mile is maybe. And that's like a death nail. I call it, for my team, I call it no man's land maybe. It's the you've been on a first date, you've been on a few dates, you want to go for another date, you say, hey, what are you doing this Friday? And you either get, sorry, I'm busy, and then you go, well, how about Saturday? Well, no, sorry, I'm busy. And then you're like, then you're into just following up land, right? Hey, just following up to see how you are. Hey, just following up to see if you've had a chance to look at my proposal. You know, that is horrendous, okay? And that is by far the worst outcome.
Absolutely. It feels like I'm in purgatory just listening to some of those excuses. We've all been there, right? We've all been there, like on the receiving end, with the salesperson saying, hey, do you still want that pair of shoes? And you're like, no. But South
Yeah.
Africans in general, I feel we are not very good at saying no. We don't want
Well,
to hurt the other people's feelings, right? So we go maybe in a few months, or I don't quite have budgets just yet, or so there's all these excuses that you raise up.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think so. The first thing to note is when you get a maybe, you've gone too soon. Okay, you have not gone up the intimacy curve far enough before you've made the sale. And if you end up in maybe land, you've gone too soon. And this is when I will, give my team a bit of a rollicking, because they know that they need to go further up the intimacy curve before you've gone for the sale. So that's the first thing. You're in maybe because you've gone too soon. Secondly, how do I get out of maybe? Like, now what do I do? Oh God, I don't want to be in this purgatory, just following up mode. So the way I talk about this is you need to really push for the no. And as you rightly say, and and having worked in several countries now, South Africans, you're absolutely right. They're the most polite people you could ever meet, and they really don't like saying no. So you got to push for it. Like, you got to really push for it. And the way you might do that, and if I take it back to the dating analogy, you've gone for the date on the Friday, you've got a no, or you've got a maybe, or and you're just following up. If you're in that dating analogy, the sorts of things you might say is, hey, it seems like you're too busy to pursue this further at the moment. And what you get there is you get no, I'm not. Or or you'll get, and of course then that moves you to yes, or you'll get no, you're right, I'm sorry, I'm not interested right now. And that is, it's a much more comprehensive conversation, if you like, a much more with a better outcome to push for that no. So if you're in a business conversation, it might be, hey, it seems like you're not interested in this at the moment. And it's literally as quick as that. And either it'll go and it'll just people will just leave it hanging. That's fine, because that's also a no. Or they'll actually come back and say, oh no, I am interested. No, I am. And in pushing for the no, you've pushed past the maybe. So that's for me, that's the best way of moving from maybe to a yes or a no. Now, maybe we should just go back and talk about no a bit more. Like, what if you hear no? Like, what if you hear, you've gone to yes and you haven't got yes, so now you've got a no. What do you do then?
So, George, if you don't mind, I think it's an appropriate point just to, and thank you so much for everyone's comments. Frank's really active on the Q&A.
Hey, Frank, nice to see you, Frank. my number one fan.
Someone from Anonymous, they didn't click the button. How do you know what to do when you're keen to go higher up the curve, but the other party is not? Is it as blunt as abandoning the effort? And I think what you alluded to now was, if you can understand where someone is on the intimacy curve, and then you actually do push for the sale, but maybe you get a maybe, you can exit that gracefully if you feel that's right for you. And what you're going to go to now is, if you decide to turn that around, there's a few other strategies you can do to turn that no into a yes.
Yeah, exactly right, Mike. Once a brilliant book to read around this, and there's quite a few that say that are about getting no. Chris Voss, who was an FBI hostage negotiator, he wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. And he and obviously when you're dealing with hostages, it's a very intense communication situation, right? So one of the tactics he employs is pushing for the no. And when you hear no, of course, our human nature is, oh, they've said no, okay, oh, just move, But actually, when you don't hear no, you hear, okay, let me understand why it's a no. And you push for the answers as to why it's a no. Then you might actually be able to turn that to a yes. And if it's about, I just don't have budget this year, it's something that, that I just haven't got time for at the moment, or whatever it might be. Now you've got some answers. Now, if you can change that to a yes, it's actually a more powerful yes than someone going straight for yes in the sale. So that effort of moving a no to yes is actually the most positive sale you can actually make. And I think people quite often just get pushed away at the no, and they walk away with their tail between their legs. Now, if you can get yourself over that and explore why it's a no, you actually may well have the strongest and deepest connection on the intimacy curve for future sales as well. So a no to a yes is actually the very best outcome.
So I was just thinking about, I won't mention my daughter's boyfriend and how relentless he was in trying to court her, and she finally relented. But she's probably going to be really embarrassed if I said that.
She might not be on. She might not be. But you're right.
But I
actually.
guess, yeah, it's identify, like using no, you then get very quickly to the reason for the no, and you'll be able to decide, well, am I able to remedy or answer that in time, or with budget, or with opportunity, whatever. Like there's strategies you can employ for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the strategies, again, you're kind of working your way back up the intimacy curve again. So what are the strategies? What are the things that I can do to make this no a yes? And that actually is very powerful. So once you've got over the disappointment of no, and you've actually grabbed this sale by the horns and said, no, I'm going to explore this further. Now you're into this world of, actually, do you know what? Let's move you up the intimacy curve again. And it might be that you're using different team members to make them feel loved. It might be that you know, they love rugby or cricket and you go out to the cricket together. It might be that it's not a no forever. It's just a no right now. And understanding that and keeping that at a certain point on the intimacy curve, knowing that you're going to move it further up the intimacy curve, is just as powerful as going straight up the intimacy curve, right? So I think, you know, it's this, you know, as a sales team and as a sales person, this constant evaluation of your funnel to understand where each of your clients are on the intimacy curve, whether they're in a pain or a pleasure sale, and therefore how far up you want to move them on the intimacy curve. Are they paused for the time being, or are you actually going to move them up? Have they just been in through a pain situation with you, and then you're going to move them further up? You know, all of this needs to be taken into consideration when you're actually moving people up and down the intimacy curve. And I think that's the key. Is, you know, a lot of this is done by great salespeople, but they do it without thinking about it. They do it subconsciously. They're great salespeople. They don't know why they're great salespeople, right? They just, you know, they move people up the intimacy curve, but they don't really know they're doing it. They don't know how they're doing it. You know, this is a framework of language that you can actually use across your team to say, okay, client A is probably a quarter up the intimacy curve, nowhere near the point you need to get them to make the sale. And if anyone does try and make the sale, they get a proper clap. And you know, what are we going to do to move that person further up the intimacy curve? That's really the crux of it, is this framework of language that you can use across your business to actually move people through the sales funnel, up the intimacy curve, to be able to get to a place where you can actually make the sale, get a yes or a no, but not a maybe, and really, you know, move those prospects through to a place where you can actually maximize the value of your business.
George, I'm going to throw you a curveball now, because you know, all of this works pre-COVID. We were seeing people every day, and then Tinder came along and sort of like transactionalized, you know, relationship building or not. And so I guess in this fast-paced digital world, what can advisors do? What do you do to sort of circumvent this immediacy of the phone and the screen and people just wanting to meet and sort of and the short-term nature of some of those interactions, where and how do you keep reminding yourself and your team to move towards the longer term thinking and the building of those relationships?
Yeah, swipe right. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. When you're in the and of course, you know, we've moved so far towards this transaction. You know, I think nowadays people are working at the bottom of the intimacy curve far more often, right? And a lot of the transactions we do, whether they're personal relationship transactions or or just doing business with another business, we tend to spend a lot more time these days at the bottom of the curve, right? And that's, I think, a function of being able to do stuff online like we're doing today, or just that we just don't have time anymore. The world is moving so fast and it's so digital, and there's this opportunity to just engage digitally, and that has its benefits because, hey, I can just get on to the next task, right? Yeah, tick, 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 tick. But think about that employee who's working, with the employer. They'll move on somewhere else if you don't make them feel connected in your business. Think about that customer who you're just interacting with on that at the bottom of the intimacy curve. You're being incredibly efficient. You're doing everything they want you to do. You're doing it well, but you're at the bottom of the intimacy curve. They will be able to move on anywhere else, and they'll get their head turned by anyone that comes along. And it's the same for things like Tinder. You both know why you're on Tinder. It's, unless you put the effort to move to a deeper belief and deep connection place, I belong with you, then you aren't going to end up living a life at the bottom of the intimacy curve. And you see this, and it's actually, I think, on a deeper level, on a more social level, it's actually a real risk we've got in society at the moment, that people don't ever get to experience that deep connection that you get from moving up the intimacy curve. So they don't even understand firstly, they don't understand what it feels like, and therefore they don't understand how to do it. And I've had people come through my organization and my teams where you've had to actually really talk about, how it feels to belong somewhere, how it feels to belong to someone, because they're so busy looking at their phones, looking at social media, that whole kind of, I'm comparing my inside with your outside, all of that kind of stuff is all happening at the bottom of the intimacy curve. And it's a really big problem, I think, and it'll become a bigger problem as we move through in future decades, to actually help young people understand how treasured you should make those relationships where you've got belief and belonging together.
I love that concept, George, treasuring a relationship. And maybe it's age, as you get older, you start to realize that having a smaller number of high quality relationships is probably better for you long term than sort of a sea of acquaintances who don't really care about you or know when your birthday is. So
well, they do know because it's on Facebook. You see, that's the thing. I mean, I don't know about you, but my birthday was in July recently, and I've got a ton of messages from people who never can be bothered to message me at any other point in the year, apart from to try and make themselves feel good that it's my birthday, and they're going to say happy birthday to me. Again, transactional. It actually doesn't mean anything. What means something is taking me up that intimacy curve.
Yeah. So that's a great example, George, in that it seems meaningful that someone wishes you for your birthday, but actually, how meaningful is it? So did that person phone you when you were promoted and congratulate you on the win? Did that person commiserate you when you got divorced or whatever? Like, it was, and do they do it one-on-one, or are they doing it for others? And so I think there's an opportunity in this new digital world to think about our interactions and how authentically we're showing up and doing them. And so a question came from Tom about what's the average wait time before we can actively start trying to move up the curve. And we did touch on the slow burn versus the sort of really quick. And so I think the answer is it depends. It depends on the prospect. It depends on where you're at and what that fit feels like in terms of approaching the relationship build. But do you want to add a bit to that?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that point I was making earlier about you can move as quickly up the intimacy curve as you want. Those relationships where you get swept off your feet, they're amazing. Those relationships where they're slow burn, they're also amazing. The key in business particularly is when that client can articulate the benefits that you're going to bring to their business, that's the point in which you can actually move. If they can't articulate the benefit you're going to bring them, you haven't reached the point yet. You haven't reached the right point yet. And a lot of us have kind of things that we demo, things that we show. And the worst thing and some people do this, but they go in on the first appointment and they start demoing. I've been on the receiving end of that, and it's just tortuous. Don't demo to me until I can articulate back to you the benefit that you're bringing to my business, at which point now you can start demoing and we start going down the sale route. So absolutely. Tom, it does depend. It depends on the receiver. It might be that the second appointment you're ready to demo, you might be ready to make the sale, and that's great, but not often. A lot unless you're in a pain sale. And if you're in a pain sale, you're kind of straight in there, straight into task, get stuff done. I think that's the key. The key to understanding when you're ready to go, when that client can articulate back to you the benefit you're going to bring to them.
Yeah, that's the key measure. If you had to send that client along to do some selling for you, would they be able to do it?
Yeah, exactly that. I'd just like to go back to what you were talking about earlier, Mike, about it was the birthday messages, all of that, and the problem we've got is that a lot of companies use CRMs. We're all on LinkedIn. We all know when everyone's birthday is, and a lot of people put everything about their life on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. And as we move through and get more and more digital, we actually get more and more distant from each other. And one of the ways in which you can actually connect with people is to go back to old school methods. You mentioned phoning someone. There is actually nothing better than a handwritten note, right? A handwritten note that you can send to someone that says, thanks so much for reaching out, or thanks so much for what you did for me. I hear you're going through a bad time. You can always reach out to me. I'm here for you. If in this increasingly digital world, when we're swipe right, swipe left, Facebook, Instagram, all of that, thinking that we can make connections that way, and you can't. Go old school. And it's as simple as, I think back to some of my dentistry stuff, and I'm sorry, I'm going back there again, but some of the stuff we used to do there was very much about pushing clients up the intimacy curve. And if I think back to, when a client had recommended, or a patient had recommended another patient, the care and attention we went to, it wasn't just a phone call or an email that said, hey, thanks so much for recommending so-and-so to me. It was much, much deeper than that. We used to have it was actually quite systematized, but it felt very personal. So we used to have a list of about 6 gifts that we would be able to send to that patient. And there would always be a handwritten note in that patient. Thank you very much. And we'd also make sure we sent it to their place of work. I mean, I think one of them was 6 cupcakes, which were kind of done in the tooth kind of, way. There was one which was a dressing gown. That was always a very nice gift. And you think about, the amount it costs you to get a new patient versus, and the likelihood that new client is going to leave you versus one that's been recommended. It hasn't cost you anything to get that patient. So actually, the fact that you can spend a bit of money saying thank you to the person who's recommended that patient, I think is really important. So we used to take the time to package these gifts really beautifully, handwritten note. And what we always used to do? We used to send it to their place of work. So they'd open it in front of all their colleagues. And of course, their colleagues would go, wow, my dentist doesn't do. Yeah, my dentist doesn't do that. So, again, you think about this in a romantic sense, and it has to be an authentic gift as well. But, those flowers that come to people at work and all of that, goodness me, they make you feel special, right? Those things that people do that, are authentic to you. You might not be the type of guy to send flowers to work or whatever, but those things that are authentic to you, to do those, to make someone feel special, are absolutely the things that are going to move you and your relationship up that intimacy curve to the deep connection place. So that don't lose sight of old school methods to connect with people, because increasingly people are trying to connect digitally and feeling empty.
Absolutely, George. Oftentimes it's just the act of noticing something or somebody or someone that they've done something that's valuable to you, or they've helped you, it's not so much that you've taken the time, they feel like they've been seen.
Yes.
And so that's it's often underestimated the impact that can have.
And again, take this back to the employer-employee situation. How can I make sure that this person feels like they've been seen? It's not just about they've done great sales for the quarter. It's not just about, hey, bud, you've done fantastically this quarter, well done. It's about, hey, let me understand, how you made these sales. Like, let's see if we can share that knowledge with the rest of the team. Like, how did you do it? I want to take some time with the team to understand, so that they can learn from you. I want to understand the headwinds that you had, that you had to overcome to have such a great quarter. That's now I'm starting to make you feel like, and I'm authentically interested. I'm not just saying this stuff, I'm authentically interested in how this person's achieved what they've achieved in this quarter. And I want to share it with the rest of the team. Again, it's all about belonging. It's all about, I belong with you. I feel like I belong here. I'm not just fitting in.
So, George, I'm just checking some of the questions online. A very astute observation from Jeremy. Thanks, Jeremy. I'm just going to read the one line. It says, the ability to resolve relationship and task tension is achieved by asking more than telling, which is a very good observation there about building trust before moving to try and propose solutions. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great observation. And, again, as we, as people are interacting more digitally and they're not doing that face-to-face stuff, families don't necessarily sit around the table anymore and talk when they have a meal together. You lose that art of conversation. We hear, we don't listen. And that's a real problem, because I think you're absolutely right. It is about listening. It's about actively listening. So building on what the person has said rather than listening just to respond, listening to understand so that you can build on what they're saying. People who, are stuck on their screens, they just lose that. And you can't learn that from a TikTok video, even though there's tons of them out there that tell you can. You can only learn that by putting yourself in quite difficult situations and working your way through it. And those relationships that have been up and down that intimacy curve several times are usually the strongest relationships, because they've worked their way up and down and they've overcome the speed humps. And they might be significant speed humps in some cases, but actually, the longer you are together, the deeper the connection. The trick is to not end up in a long-term relationship where you're just at the transactional level at the bottom, and recognizing whether you're at that transactional level at the bottom. How are we going to get the spark back? How are we going to move ourselves back up the intimacy curve? I mean, that's a whole other webinar, I think. But anyway, that's the risk.
Sure. George, I was going to ask you for closing remarks, but you basically summed it up right there in the last 2 minutes. So thanks for doing my job for me.
No problem.
I just want to check there's no more questions online. We're getting lots of claps and hearts. So thank you so much. We're about to run out of time. George, thank you so much for your insights, for the discussion today, and hopefully our financial advisors on the call can go out there and move their prospective clients up the intimacy curve. As always, we're INN8, the advisor's partner, and until next time, thank you so much and goodbye.
INN8 is a registered trademark of Stanlib Wealth Management Pty Limited, an authorized financial services provider.